If you don't know who he was, you haven't spent much time in Anchorage, Alaska. Over the decades, there has been an Eddie's Bar in town, starting with Eddie's Sandbox in the 1970s to Eddie's Sports Bar today, which is still a great place to grab a beer, food, and a game of pool while watching your favorite sports event on one of the many TV screens. I can still remember hearing stories from Mad Dog, a regular at the Sandbox, who worked the tower control at the airport, including the ones at Eddie's Waterhole, Eddie's Hayloft, and now at Eddie's Sports Bar. Most of what I remember as a child of me and my brother was at the pool hall and the bowling alley in a small town in Colorado. I am 12 years younger than Eddie, and so he became my babysitter since Mom was a single parent, working at least 2 jobs. As far back as I can remember, I tagged along with him to the pool hall on Main Street and the bowling alley across the street. Eddie held down 2 jobs after school in the 1950s, shining shoes and setting pins at the bowling alley. I'm sure he learned his sense of business out of necessity, but he was always there for me. I learned by observing because he was my brother and I trusted him. Walsenburg was an old coal mining town that didn't have any other industry to make it flourish. So Eddie realized at a young age that enlisting into the Marines would be a good opportunity. I remember when he came home on leave after boot camp. I was playing in the front yard and heard somebody calling, "Michael." I saw this sophisticated young man in his dress blues and said to myself, "Who is he?" As he got closer, he said, "Michael, it's your brother Eddie." I ran to him because I really missed him, just like I miss him now. Eddie didn't stay in Walsenburg very long after his stint in the Marines. He found a desk job at a bowling alley in Manitou Springs, Colorado. This was a great move for him because he was at that point a family man with a wife and children, and his bowling career got its start because he had competition to challenge him. Pot games in a bowling alley can be a real moneymaker, and if you know Eddie, you know that he loved to gamble. His bowling average skyrocketed to over 190 in league play, a prerequisite to enter the Professional Bowlers Association. I loved to visit him in Manitou Springs, a suburb of Colorado Springs, which wasn't far from our own hometown. Las Vegas was our next destination, and Eddie, although he didn't know it then, was responsible for me getting out of a small coal mining town. He got a desk job at the Showboat Casino and Bowling Alley, where his bowling career was at its peak. Some of the best bowlers in the country lived in Las Vegas, and I watched him win many pot games against the best. To this day, you can go to any bowling alley in Las Vegas and see the name Edward James posted as one of the highest 3-game series ever bowled, with well over a score of 800 total in 3-game series in league play. Most people don't know that he was a member of the Professional Bowlers Association for decades. Members must cash out in at least 2 tournaments a year to keep a membership. Las Vegas in the early 60s was a great place to visit, which I did every summer. I really liked watching him bowl. My entire family became a bowling family, including my mother and sister. They all loved Las Vegas, and it became their annual vacation for years. Eddie found himself at another crossroads when his new wife had their child and was feeling the need to raise him in a wholesome environment. Her parents were encouraging them to move to their home state, the last frontier. Anchorage, Alaska in 1965 would be called home for Eddie James for the rest of his life. Finding his way in Alaska wasn't easy. He worked construction, worked in a bowling alley, and bartended. He realized that he had the personality and motivation to open his own business, Eddie's Sandbox. After all those years greeting guests at the bowling alley from Colorado to Las Vegas, he knew that the bar business was his niche. This was something he was good at and that he could call his own. A modest establishment with cold beer, snacks, and pool tables. Eddie's trademark in every club that he owned for almost 50 years was the pool table. As usual, I followed him to Alaska in 1966 after graduating from high school. All through my childhood, everyone knew me as Little Eddie because everywhere he went, I wasn't far behind. I could only take 1 year at a time in Alaska, though. The winters were too dark and the summers were too bright. Being around Eddie was never boring. He was really good at everything. He played all the sports in school, which is why he played softball for many years in Alaska. He could hit a softball as far as anyone. I remember being on Eddie's softball team one summer, the team he sponsored for many summers. I wished I still had the t-shirt. The only thing I could beat him at was pool, and probably because I bartended in 5 of his bars and they all had pool tables. In the early 70s, Eddie had the first sanctioned 3-game series over 800 for the entire state of Alaska. I never came close to beating him at bowling or golf, which I really loved and still play. I remember seeing his plaque in his condo in Palm Springs for a sanctioned hole-in-one. I think it is fair to say that I will always love Eddie James. I respected him and trusted him. I followed him to the last frontier. He was my brother, my hero, and my father figure. I will shed many tears of joy, because I got to spend precious time with Eddie James.